Greetings, everyone. I am so thrilled to be back in conversation with my dear friend, Melanie Reinhart. And we're going to be talking today about more about the healing centaurs and how they are guiding us through this transition into the age of Aquarius in this profound time of change that we're in. So thank you for being here, Melanie.
Oh, Heather, totally my pleasure. I've been really looking forward to our conversation. I always do.
So before we get started, let me just briefly introduce you to those who may not know of your work, but I think almost you really don't need an introduction. I mean, Melanie is an internationally known astrologer, teacher, patron of the Faculty of Astrological Studies, incredible author of books like Chiron and the Healing Journey, Saturn, Chiron and the Centaurs, and Incarnation. And your work with the Centaurs is just brilliant, Melanie, and so deeply steeped in your own profound psychological understanding. So I'm excited to be in this conversation with you and to look at how these centaurs are supporting us in different levels of healing to guide us in how we individually and collectively can move into the Aquarian age in a more balanced way.
Mm. Such a rich theme, really.
So let's start with Chiron and how he has been. And you've talked in our earlier conversations about how long Chiron's journey is in Aries
Yeah,
because of its elliptical orbit.
yes,
But I'd love to talk about just its significance in being in Aries, as one of my ongoing themes is we're needing to heal the out of balance patterns from the age of Aries that carried over into the age of Pisces to
yeah,
move more clearly and fully into the age of Aquarius.
yes,
But then I'd also love to touch on Chiron's being in this ongoing connection with Eris Xena from April 2024 to April 2027.
yes, yes.
So dive in wherever you want to with that.
So what's coming to my mind is to do with Chiron's position in the solar system. So what we might call the traditional planets are essentially the visible ones, of which the furthest out one is Saturn. So next out is Uranus, then Neptune, then Pluto. So that's a very important threshold between Saturn and Uranus. And to me, the most interesting thing about the sign of Aquarius is that it has become dual ruled. So originally, Saturn was given the rulership over Aquarius. And once Uranus was discovered, some astrologers replaced the old rulership of Saturn and just said, oh no, Uranus is now the ruler. And some people ignored it and carried on with Saturn. And others, and I'm in the others group, think of it as dual ruled Saturn and Uranus, because to me, that particular polarity speaks volumes about some of the core meanings of Aquarius. And given that we are in a transition into the age of Aquarius, and I'll say that, but I will also qualify it, that I'm sure probably most of you watching this know that there's huge amount of controversy about, oh, well, when does it start? You know, when does the age of Aquarius begin? And pretty much even people who poo-poo astrology, they know about the age of Aquarius. And that relates back to one of the key songs in the musical Hair. That goes back a long way. So I'm old enough to have seen one of the first productions of it. And there was a famous song called Let the Light Shine. And the refrain was to do with this is the dawning of the age of Aquarius. So back then, that was the beginning of the times when astrology was going to become a kind of lingua franca in the collective, so to speak. Before that, it definitely wasn't. It was highly arcane and esoteric and all the rest. And after that, increasingly, decade by decade, all different things to do with astrology entered the collective mind in a conscious way. That itself is an Aquarian phenomenon. It being an air sign, Aquarius, and the third of three. So one could say it's the most developed level of mind that can encompass more, and so on. And to me, to have the dual rulership is just so fascinating because one can see that dynamic borne out, not only in the collective, because Aquarius is a very collective sign from one point of view, but if we transpose that into individual experience, there's a very deep need in the sign of Aquarius, it being the last of the air signs, that its mind can go further away from what is just individual or only human, can go so far away from that into all kinds of wonderfully inspirational things, that the need and the urgency to connect back with our own individuality and our own humanity, it becomes more and more crucial. So the sun rules Leo, which is the polar opposite sign to Aquarius. So I like to think of this in terms of a polarity. So, whatever you might think about the age of Aquarius, well, it's opposite the sign of Leo. And so balancing those particular opposites is very much part of the journey. And so Chiron comes into consciousness, or is born right in between those two. Not only that, Chiron actually, in its orbital path, it crosses over the orbital path of Saturn. So for part of its orbit, I believe it's about 13%. I did work it out once, can't remember. Chiron becomes then an inner planet, kind of cohorting with the visibles, invisibly cohorting with the visibles. And then when he goes back out again across Saturn's orbit, moving outwards towards his aphelion, that's the point furthest away from the sun, is very near the orbital path of Uranus. So he doesn't cross over the entire orbital path, but stays almost on the orbital path of Uranus, so to speak. And that's so fascinating. When I first discovered that, what it spoke to me of, I thought, oh, that's just like the journey of personal unfoldment. Personal unfoldment, think Leo, I thought, oh, it's just like that. In other words, we have a big aha, and our mind opens and we think we've cracked it and we've got it and we understand everything, the whole cosmos, etc., etc. And then typically sooner or later there's a crash. It can be a gentle landing. I wish us all gentle landings. But it can sometimes be a crash,
Mm.
a landing with a real thud into the realm of Saturn. Saturn is still called the Lord of Karma in the Vedic or Indian astrology. And I'm sure that any of you who have lived through significant Saturn transits, which will be everybody because of the way it moves, you will have your own understanding of what that means. Transits of Saturn can take us actually very deep indeed. Certainly, there's a confrontation with our mortality.
Mm.
And that doesn't have to be a big trauma, but it often is,
Mm.
you know? And so we go clunk down into 3D and materiality and feel like, oh no, lost this beautiful clarity and vision and all the rest of it. And guess what? That comes back. Uranus doesn't leave us forever, but we cannot control him
Mm.
as to when and where and how. That amazing, scintillating flash of understanding might come.
Mm.
I know it's a cliche, but it's true that, many people have those kind of Uranian flashes when they're ironing a shirt or peeling a potato or just walking in nature, etc. And then bang, along comes this potentially life-changing insights. Read lots of biographies of people who have made huge contributions, who had some kind of epiphany and changed their life.
Because Uranus is that higher octave of Mercury. It is our connection to divine mind, and it is that
Absolutely.
clarity that cuts through illusion and allows us to see
Absolutely.
to the heart of things. But in light of what you're saying, Melanie, do you think Chiron is helping us heal that interface between
Absolutely.
our ego and our experience in this third dimensional reality and our karma
Yes,
and our connection to divine mind and the transpersonal realm
absolutely.
so that we can become more integrated within ourselves,
Yeah.
to
Yeah,
integrate our mortality and our immortality.
absolutely. There's a famous quote by Plotinus, ancient Greek writer, who said that mankind is poised between the beasts and the gods.
Mm.
And I love that because here, beasts can also be a poetic way of referring to our own instincts, um, which, of course, are very predominant in our experience of the pre-verbal times. And that period, it can kind of neatly be summarized by that's the first Mars cycle in our life. And we get our very first Mars return at about 2.5. And so to me, that this whole transit of Mars in Aries, Chiron in Aries, refers to its Mars rulership in that way and can potentially help us to see the personal roots of where some of those very deep instinctual energies arise. Because if they're not wisely witnessed or contained, they can carry on escalating through the rest of our lives. And Mars was known as the god of war, okay? So he's pretty active at the moment. Suddenly occurred to me, listening to the radio, there was either newscasts, which were all pretty much blow by blow accounts of different war fronts that are all hot at the moment. Or else fanatical sports reporting. I thought, oh, that's also Mars, you know?
Well, and that's part of my sense of Chiron in Aries is that, you know, if you think about the precessional cycle and if you think about our movement into the age of Aries as our movement further into the Kali Yuga from that Hindu Yuga cycle perspective, it was the time where we as humanity move into our lowest level of consciousness. And we got caught, from my perspective, in an out of balanced expression of Mars, which became about power over, conquest, wars, violence. And it feels like Chiron is trying to heal that, is saying we as humanity need to heal that out of balanced expression of Mars, or we will self destruct. And that Chiron is guiding us in how to come back into balance. And as you said, see that survival of the fittest instinctual part of ourselves from a witness self perspective so that we're not ruled by that, but come back into our full capacity as humanity and our higher level of consciousness.
Yeah, and you know, I don't know who said this, but I either read it or heard it somewhere. The notion that the 20th century might be known in future, amongst other things, but might be known as the century of psychology. Although the roots of psychology, of course, go way further back and so on and so forth. But it is remarkable how some key concepts, even from depth psychology, have entered the collective knowing to quite some degree, because the coming into balance that you so wisely refer to can't be done by making that into an ideology again, because that's one of the Aquarian traps. Ideology, I mean. But the capacity to witness and having some understanding of the instinctual, biological, evolutionary roots at an individual level, that really helps to break the collective spell, I think. And we have the opportunity to do this at the moment, you know.
Well said. And what do you make of Chiron's dance with Eris across these 3 years from April 2024 to April 2027 in Aries?
Well, in a way, it's a magnification of the very theme that we're discussing. Because if you think about this, the story around Eris, you know, there's lots of very potent and very uncomfortable emotions that thread through it. And so the healing is shining its light right there for us to witness and understand and maybe feel for the first time, rather than do that thing of deny, split, and project. Because in a way, that function, deny, split, and project, you can see that at work in all wars everywhere. And so if we think Aquarius Leo, then a really important part of our task at this threshold is on the Leo end. And of course, Leo even relates to the child, you know. And so understanding some of those very strong feelings, what they're about and where they come from and so forth. Leo also rules the heart physically, but I think it's not only physical, you know. And so that can be very much a heart-opening experience, because certainly transits of Eris, they can certainly raise, like if you're really monitoring it individually, rather than just going, oh wow, and looking at the TV and having your daily dose of horror as you watch the news and so forth. It all fits, with the Eris transit. But if you turn inward instead, you will find that you're registering some extremely cringy feelings, that it's potentially very healing to be able to just bear with rather than reacting to your own feelings, because then you kind of put the lid on them or go into shame. It's like, oh my God, I never knew that I was so jealous, or whatever, or reviewing ancient jealousies that you have experienced and so forth. And quickly coming in with a judgment that said, oh, words to the effect of, I really am a bad person, kind of thing. I have to hide that. Nobody must see that. So, if we can kind of get into the process before that happens and just sort of cuts it short, well, then there is the healing, because the energy has been allowed to be directed in a different way.
And you're working it consciously rather than caught in it reactively in an unconscious way.
Exactly.
But one of the things you're just talking about too, Melanie, is how destructive projection is. And that feels to me like it's so at play in our world right now in terms of the level of polarization that's going on,
Yes.
that's coming from the ways in which we project onto others and then react to them or lash out at them or get caught in wars with them. But another piece of that, in terms of this Chiron Arizina dance, let me just ask if this makes any sense to you. Because part of my passionate interpretation of Arizina is that which is why I call her Arizina, is that her very name, being called Eris, was a projection by the international astronomers who had to meet to decide after her discovery whether she was a planet or not, which led to that whole controversy over how to define a planet, led to poor Pluto being demoted. And because they got caught in such conflict with each other, they called her, because they saw her as the catalyst for their disagreements, they called
Yes.
her Eris, goddess of strife and discord. Whereas my sense of her is that her meaning is related to the fact that she is a planet like Uranus who defies our natural understanding of planets. And she has this orbit that's 44 degrees off the ecliptic. So
Wow.
she
So,
dares to follow her own path, but it's unsettling to our conventional ways of looking at things. So we project onto her and call her Eris, the goddess of strife and discord. And I feel like Chiron may be saying, take back your projections,
yeah.
heal and let go of those ways in which you get uncomfortable when someone's different from you, and label them and then separate yourself from them and relate to them in a hostile way. And the
Yeah,
two of them may be saying, heal that, let go of those projections, and be more tolerant and open to diversity.
I love what you just said. That's wonderful. What came into my mind as you were talking, and I'm glad I remembered it, is that um, in the work of Alice Bailey, she gives a whole set of additional rulerships of signs and planets and so forth. And so, lo and behold, Uranus is the esoteric ruler of Libra. And so, what you were just saying there about the balance and the awareness, because that's essentially a relational field that you're referring to, whether it's just, one on one or groups or nations or whatever, And so Uranus as ruling Libra, I remember sort of leaping with joy when I discovered that. I thought, oh, that's so cool, you know?
Oh, that's brilliant because Libra is so much about being in right relationship with each
Yes,
other.
absolutely. Absolutely.
So Uranus can cut through our illusions and our projections to help us see each other more clearly and come back into right relationship with each other.
Yes. And I'm sure you know this, but you know, the orbital path of Uranus is actually 90 degrees to the main plane of all the other orbits in the solar system. So it's like that, you know. And so an image that I just love, and I've probably said it before in a video, so forgive the repetition if you've heard this before. But, you know, if you imagine that you're standing on the sun, okay, only imagine, but imagine you're standing on the sun and you're looking out across the plane of the ecliptic, because all the planets move in a plane which is not that wide actually. They will move in the same plane, you know, give or take a degree here, there, so on, but it's like looking out across the plane. And way, way out beyond Saturn, if you're standing on the sun, what you see is like a big eye looking at you, because Uranus has
Mhm.
rings, you see, as well. So it's like the eye in the sky, pun intended, I, me, etc. I see,
Mm,
so on. But it's not, it's in fact, it's 87 degrees, if I remember correctly. And the orbit of Erisina is also very steeply inclined to the
yes,
ecliptic. So that matches beautifully. The astronomy matches beautifully what you just said, you know.
yes. Fascinating. Well, let's shift and talk about Pholus
Okay.
because I am utterly fascinated with the way that Pholus is right now in between Ixion and Quawar. The three of them have been in this combination in Capricorn, and they came into conjunction with each other within 5 degrees in November of 2021 and will be in this dance with each other in Capricorn through December of 2039. And
Wow,
then
I
by,
didn't quite clocked it was that long.
and then by 2040, they start moving into Aquarius, and then they're continuing in this dance together in Aquarius. But it feels
Oh,
to me so profound that for 18 years, they're in this connection with each other in Capricorn. And that feels highly significant in terms of that healing centaur trying to bridge Ixion and Quawar, these two Kuiper Belt objects, into
yes.
radically different meanings, guiding us through this transition time. So I'd love your thoughts on that and then to share some of my thoughts on that, because I think that's very powerful.
Yeah, I agree. That's very powerful. One thing that comes to mind immediately uh, is the story of Ixion, because he was a son of Ares, as in Aries. Cue all the things we've already said about Mars and Aries and the first Mars cycle that we experience and so forth. So lo and behold, Ixion is a child of Ares and has a very poignant and quite well-known story. So Ares killed his father-in-law, supposedly because he, the father-in-law, refused to pay the bride price for his wife.
Ixion did. Mhm.
And this he did by pushing the father-in-law into a bed of burning coals. And he eventually, Ixion, he eventually went mad, kind of defiled by guilt, whereupon Zeus took pity on him, and Exion was invited up to Olympus as a guest of Zeus himself. So instead of feeling grateful for having been rescued, as it were, Ixion lusted after Zeus's wife, Hera. And Zeus could see what was happening. And so to test the intentions of Ixion, Zeus made a cloud in the form of his wife, Hera, and called it Nephili. And Ixion, true to his character, raped Nephele, and so was found out. And their child was called Centaurus, and he then mated with the Magnesian mares, that's from the realm of Magnesia in ancient Greece. And they too gave birth to the whole race of centaurs. And the story ends in a very dramatic way, in that Exion was bound by Hermes to a fiery wheel in the sky.
For
So
all
he was
eternity.
sorry?
For all eternity.
For all eternity, yes. So lots of complexity in there, but he really did pay for it by being bound to this fiery wheel in the sky. That's also one version of the parentage of the centaurs en masse. So there are other individual centaurs, however, who have a specific parentage. They were not just born from, one of the whole mass of centaurs. When centaurs are referred to generically throughout the mythology of ancient Greece, they're usually it's these centaurs that are being referred to, the ones who had a reputation of being hell raisers and plunderers and rapists, and like a kind of football crowd gone mad, is how I think of them. And so that none of them have direct Olympian parentage, but Chiron does, because he's a son of Kronos or Saturn.
Mm.
And moving to Pholus, specifically in the mythology around Pholus, there's a mention of 4 generations. And that's something that you find very literally if you are doing any biographical exploration for yourself or with another person. All the centaurs can relate to ancestral themes, ancestral karma, if you will. And in that sense, the healing, the witnessing, the understanding of ancestral karma for the purpose of being able to receive the gifts of those who went before us. And in the case of Pholus, the 4 generations is specifically mentioned. And as a rule of thumb, you will usually you'll find something of significance 4 generations back in your own life. I wouldn't make that into a dogma, but it's astonishing how often that happens. That in one flash, in a Uranian, you can see, oh my God, you find somebody whose horoscope has a whole lot of conjunctions with your own, or whose story, as you get to know it, has all kinds of echoes in your own life, or someone that even had the same physical frailties as you've got, and conversely, someone who's got the same kind of gift that you're struggling to manifest, or that you are already manifesting, just very powerful connections. Now, what I've noticed with Pholus is that there's a very strong connection as well with the prenatal life. So, it's only very recently that in mainstream psychology, they sort of moved the threshold back to include birth.
Mhm.
Before, it was really only, little beings were only kind of thought to be human once they got past the first Mars return into the cognitive stage, right?
Mhm.
Anything that went before the pre-verbal realm, birth, and the prenatal realm was not even counted in. And gradually that threshold has been moving back. Oh, all along, of course, practitioners from the so-called alternatives, they already knew about the continuity of the thread of life all the way back through those early realms and back into the womb, and even, pre-incarnation
Yeah,
into the
past lives.
exactly into the spirit world that we came
Mhm.
from, and including past lives and so forth. That was already known, but only to the few who'd, exposed their own learning process to other cultures and ancient wisdom and so on and so forth.
Because so much of what happens in utero and in those pre-verbal years, they now understand in early developmental psychology that your personality is basically formed by age 3. So
Yeah.
much of who we are is shaped in those pre-verbal experiences that may get pushed into the unconscious. So it's profound that Pholus is that healing centaur that helps us tap into what needs to be healed from those very early developmental experiences.
Yes, the way the prenatal connection, there's many ways that it seems to connect. And I noticed that very often, so people who are really making a deep journey, if they work with a subtle body work, like craniosacral work of any kind, that they might be connecting with some prenatal memories, which can feel very bizarre because that involves the period of time when our little bodies are forming.
You
And
can also tap into it with shamanic healing work as well.
yes, of course, because the healing modalities from other cultures take all of the above into account,
Yeah.
but it's very new for the collective mind in the West.
But
One thing I've noticed is, and this now relates more to Chiron, but I'll say it anyway, is that the Chiron cycle is just over 50 years long. And around 50 years is a very common time for women to go into the menopause. And so there's something very profound happening hormonally at that time. And I personally kind of image that time in the following way. As women, it's as if our regular menstrual cycle is like a reflection of the cycle of the moon. So the moon's average length between one new moon or one full moon and the next is 29 and a half-ish days. And not every woman has a menstrual cycle that's exactly that length. But there is a ideally some kind of rhythm to it. And so within our own bodies, we carry a kind of echo or a replication even of the cycle of the sun and moon. And then everything changes at menopause when we become physically infertile. So what then happens is it all goes inside out.
Mm.
And from then on, it's like we are like a child in the womb of the universe.
Beautiful.
So instead of being the mother of potential children, we become the potential children or the actual children in the womb of the universe. That's how I.
Beautiful. I love that, Melanie. I've never thought of it that way before. That's exquisite. And it becomes such a healing time in our own lives.
Exactly.
We're in that
This,
Chiron return.
this vision came to me during my own menopause, which was exactly around my Chiron return. I only had one pass of the Chiron return. And about 6 weeks later, I had my last ever period.
Wow.
And I had no symptoms of any kind whatsoever during the process, the year before and the year after. And so absolutely no.
Beautiful.
No experiences of the kind that one could justifiably call symptoms, headaches and all kinds of very difficult physical things that can happen. And I'm sure that there's many layers of unacknowledged, I'm going to say spiritual experience that are around at that time. And, given that we're living in a culture where we don't really have much permission for that kind of thing, nowadays it's more and more likely and possible that we will connect with people who, in one way or another, will offer permission. So it's not as bleak as it was a while back.
You know, it's interesting, Melanie, is in my practice as a clinical psychologist, it was interesting to me that early trauma for women would often get reactivated at the time of beginning menstruation in
Yes,
adolescence.
yes,
And again, that early trauma, particularly pre-verbal trauma, is not something we're conscious of, but it would get re-triggered emotionally
yeah,
in the psyche at the time of adolescence with the start of menstruation. And then part of what I see with the Chiron return, whatever is unhealed gets activated to be healed at that time. So we can step
yes,
more into our healing gifts, step more into our power as
yes,
women. But
absolutely.
unresolved trauma that then gets re-triggered in adolescence can also get re-triggered at the time of going through
Yes,
menopause to try to allow us to finally clear and heal what needs to be healed.
yeah. So it's like that's like bookends.
Yes, yes,
At the beginning of menstruation and at the end,
yes.
we meet these deeper themes in order to embrace and
And heal.
encompass the experiences so that they can heal. It's
But again, the more conscious we are, we can hold with compassion and feel what we need to feel to
exactly,
allow
we
it.
can open the space for that process to come forth.
Yeah. But circling back to Pholus, in this
Yes,
dance with Exion and Quawar, I feel, and you said so beautifully, what Exion represents in terms of, again, this kind of out of balance Mars energy, caught in greed, impulse, disrespect for the gods and other humans, doesn't care about the consequences of his actions, doesn't learn from his experience, just keeps acting out.
Yeah.
Here you have Pholus, and Pholus's story is so much about how those wild out of control centaurs get activated when Pholus takes the lid off of this vat of wine to serve Hercules, who's visiting him in his cave. And Pholus is this highly conscious, healing centaur.
Yeah.
So it feels like Pholus is there in the middle between Exion and Quawar, saying we have to heal that out of balance behavior. Take the lid off. See where your behavior is causing harm, where you're caught in ego, caught being out of balance. And then I feel like Pholus is saying, I will help you heal and heal that ancestral trauma that you may still be caught in, pulling you out of balance, to then call you into the energy of Quawar, this creation deity who, from, you know, the Tongva people of Southern California, interestingly enough,
Yes, indeed.
who is all about calling everything into creation through singing the song of the spheres, the song of harmony, calling everybody back into that right relationship.
Yeah.
How exquisite
I love how you described that. Thank you.
that Pholus is the healer saying, I will bridge your getting caught in ego and out of balanced, harmful behavior to help you come back into harmony, to help you
Yeah.
come back into right relationship, to be guiding us. And in Capricorn, guiding our systems and structures that are also in that power over, conquer, be conquered, violent, destructive way of being back into remembering how to be in harmony.
Mm-hmm.
So I feel like how extraordinary that they're holding that energetic together through all these years to help us heal.
I love how you threaded that together. It's beautiful. What came to my mind as I was listening to you was, so I mentioned the 4 generations, then I went off on a bit of a tangent. Um, and partly that tangent was mindful of the fact that it's when we're in the womb, it seems like that's when we're given the portion of ancestral karma that will be meaningful to us in our lives.
Mm.
Or to put it another way, there are cultures who say that when a child is in the womb, the ancestral spirits come and talk to them.
Mm.
So they make their relationships with the ancestral spirits at that time. And in the mythology is this mention of the 4 generations. So that's back to great grandparents. And if you go 4 generations back from Pholus, the god that you get to is Hermes, which I nearly
Wow.
fell off my chair when I first saw that. I thought, that's so fabulous.
Wow.
So Silenus was the father of Pholus, and Silenus was another hybrid creature, not exactly a centaur, but he had a donkey's ears and a tail, and is said to be the prototype from which Shakespeare took the character of Bottom in Midsummer Night's Dream.
Mm.
I can hear it in my head now. I won't try and do it, don't worry. But there's that wonderful part in the music that usually accompanies that, which is the sound of a donkey braying, you know, etc., and the tail and everything. So this character Silenus, with his donkey ears and tail, he was known as the storyteller of the gods. And the way that's often described has the nuance of the fact that he was also somebody who had no qualms about bending the truth in the interest of a good story.
Mm.
In other words, he was a liar, you know.
Mm.
So there is a fascinating quality there, and of course its shadow, which is about deception, either deliberate or otherwise, and either happening innocently or with malintent, both of them, you know. And that reminds me that, you know, Robert von Heeren, who was one of the original Centaur researchers, and who, together with his friend Dieter Koch, wrote an entire book just called Pholus. And sadly, it's still only available in German. So any of you out there who speak German, buy the book, because it's a hugely important record of early research. And I don't know if it was Robert or Dieter, but somewhere in that book, there's a kind of analogy. When they wrote the book, there'd been 3 centaurs discovered: Chiron, Pholus, and Nessus. And so they made the link. The Chiron, Pholus, Nessus is Uranus, Neptune, Pluto.
Mm.
And I'm not normally one for formulas like that, but this works, I tell you. Not
Mm.
as a kind of hard and fast piece of dogma about the centaurs, but as something to bounce off. So
Can I go ahead?
I was just going to say, and so that so fits with Pholus being the son of Silenus, the storyteller of the gods. And I've known a number of people who have been professional storytellers. They've all got Pholus really strong in their horoscope. And
Wow.
I've also, you know, well, you don't have to look far to find the horoscope of liars these days. And you will find Pholus on their horoscopes really strong.
This is fascinating, Melanie. I didn't know that piece about Pholus, and fascinating that he traces his lineage then back to Hermes. So, do
Exactly.
you think, I mean, I've so understood Pholus as guiding us in healing these ancestral wounds and
Yeah.
issues and karma, but do you think Pholus, and this is profound to think about, is also the one that's trying to guide us to heal all of this level of misinformation,
The deceptions.
disinformation, manipulation of
Absolutely.
that is going on in the world right now? That Pholus is trying to guide us back 4 generations or back to that energy of Hermes, the wise one, the messenger
Yeah,
of
the
gods.
one who carries discernment,
Yes,
you
and
know,
truth.
is the grandfather. Oh, and in between, so Silenus was the father of Pholus, and the father of Silenus was the great god Pan, who was a son of Hermes. So
This
we've
is
got that same,
fascinating.
isn't it amazing? We've got that same polarity, or dialectic, I'd rather call it, even, between the instincts and the intellect, or body and spirit, etc., and how the work of linking those different levels is central to one's spiritual unfoldment, and for that matter, one's well-being and good health as well, you know.
And commitment to truth
Yes.
versus using reality for your own ends.
Yeah,
Misinformation, disinformation.
exactly. You know, beginning in 2016, in the summer northern hemisphere of 2016, and going on until just about now, you might all be making political connections here. So I noticed, so back in 2015, I noticed that there was going to be a whole trail of squares between Chiron and Pholus.
Mm.
And
Mm.
because both of them, Pholus is approaching its aphelion and Chiron approaching that too. In other words, they're the furthest away from the sun. Therefore, their orbits, their speed appears to be much slower because they're at the long end of their orbit, further out. And I remember looking at that and thinking, wow, what's that about? That looks pretty highly charged. And the next time I thought to look at the graph of that movement, lo and behold, I saw that they came into an almost exact square in the summer of 2016. And here in the UK, that was closest to exact in the fated week with the vote about Brexit. So, in other words, leaving the European Union, and there are still people who think that was a terrible mistake and we should try and row back if we can. And the rest of the people say, no, we have to go, etc. And then by the autumn of that same year, Donald Trump was elected against all the odds. And I looked at that and I thought, okay, in these few months, this pattern with the Centaurs has accompanied events that will change the world.
Mm.
And I still thought, so what is this now to do with health? And I looked at all the places where these two had their exact contacts, and I kind of kept an eye on things. You know, my perhaps naive little hope was I thought, oh, you know, maybe now there'll be some favorable legislation as regards alternative practitioners and alternative medicine and so forth. Well, that did not happen. We did have a lot of disease about which there were told numerous lies and a lot of misinformation, disinformation, which contributed strongly to a huge amount of polarization. Just unbelievable. And that's not finished. I won't go too deeply into this, but what we've seen now is that Pholus is now picking up an aspect with Uranus. So it was Chiron and Pholus for years. It lasted all the way through until last year, in fact, about 8 years worth. And
Yeah.
in 2017, I think it was, anyway, early into the sequence, I forget which dictionary it was, but one of the big dictionaries had as word of the year fake news.
Mm.
And I thought that's so perfect for the symbolism of Pholus and telling the story, you know, and being a liar at the same time, or potentially, you know. So that's when the whole phenomenon of fake news and misinformation, disinformation began to really proliferate. And now it's a kind of known phenomenon, which in some ways is increasing people's discernment and their own endeavors to find out the truth in many situations. But of course, it goes even deeper than that.
But are you saying then that the Uranus sextile with Pholus is trying to guide us into clarity, to cut through the
Yes,
misinformation
yes,
and back into?
yes, I believe it is because, you know, um, it's actually a sesquiquadrate, but Pholus is still in Capricorn. It goes very
That's right. I'm thinking of Nessus. Yeah.
it goes very slowly through Capricorn. But there's the reference to the mainstream, what has already been established, and the structures of society and all the rest of it. And so along comes Pholus making sesquiquadrate aspects, which is an aspect that I always think of as one which deals with consequences, like chickens coming home to roost kind of thing, you know. And with Uranus, I think the sharpness of perception that can be evoked.
That can cut through illusion.
Exactly right.
And it must coincide then. I was thinking actually of the sextile with Nessus going on too at the same time. So these
Yes.
healing centaurs are trying, with Uranus, are trying to call us back into truth and discernment
Yes. Exactly.
and
Because
clarity.
all the aspects, in fact, if you look at it graphically, what you'll see, from 2015 is this whole, it looks like a whole chain. And you can even research the dates and say, oop, yes, that was when lockdown was announced, and oop, yes, this is when this happened, that happened, and so forth. And of course, it's got its internal counterparts. And then just as those are moving out of range from each other, in comes the Uranus Pholus, different aspect, but it's sort of just like a relay race, sort of picks up that energy to take it forward.
So part of it sounds like what you're saying, Melanie, and I know we just have a few minutes left, but it feels like as we are experiencing these transits, these configurations with these healing centaurs, they're trying to call us into more consciousness. They're
Yeah.
trying to, and it feels like in conjunction now with the increasing solar energies that we're getting,
Mhm.
that we're being guided into the light of consciousness, and that what has been in the shadows and these projections and disinformation and polarization is all being brought to the surface
Yeah.
so that we can heal. But if we don't work with it consciously, it sounds like part of what you're saying is these aspects then can actually lead us even more into the shadow expression of those ways that we're out of balance.
Yeah, I think that can happen. What can also happen is if we get caught in reactivity towards any of those, multiple distortions, if we get caught and kind of stuck in just reacting to it by, one could say, justifiably um, judging things as wrong or crazy or whatever it is. And it's not to say that they're not wrong or crazy, but if we get stuck in the reactivity, that can be very draining of our own energy. So to be able to witness what's going on and take whatever action one is called to, because it's not everybody's destiny to be like driving ambulances on the front line. There is an inner way as well, which makes a huge contribution to the field in which everybody lives. And so there's a whole process of purification going on here, as I understand it. And again, I keep on still coming back to the fact that Chiron is in between Saturn and Uranus. That's its point where it was discovered. And so it was born in the land of the in-between. And so, getting caught in reactivity to what's going on at the moment, that often will make us polarize and then get stuck there.
Well, you're making such a good point, Melanie, that if we get caught in reactivity, then we're still caught in the dysfunction.
Yes.
And that what you're saying, and I think this is so profound in terms of Chiron and Cheroklo in a different way, it can guide us into honoring that awareness, being in that witness self, to heal, to come back into balance within ourselves. And then we're emanating that energy into the collective consciousness, into the morphogenic field to help there
Yeah.
be a more healing energy in the field. But if we're caught in these out of balance patterns, then we're feeding into
then we're just
trauma.
contributing to that very thing,
Yeah.
you know. And I think more and more these days, people are awakening to a sensitivity to and a perception of these other levels, other dimensions that we're referring to. But again, I wouldn't be talking like this in the wrong company. Go and be locked up, you know? I don't want to be locked up. Thank you very much.
Well, we need to stop, but I so appreciate your consciousness, Melanie. I so appreciate the deep work you've done with these healing centaurs. And I so feel that they're in such a profound way trying to call us individually and collectively into our own healing journeys, because then we can move into higher consciousness. We can access these new paradigms of the Aquarian age. We can move into that more unified field of consciousness and being in right relationship with each other and all of life. So thank you for the way that you live that and emulate that and guide us with your wisdom about the centaurs.
Well, thank you. Thank you for the lovely words that you offered there. It's totally my pleasure to feel free to speak about these things, you know. And it is true, however you understand the planets and the centaurs and all that, whether you think of them as lumps of rock flying around the sun, or whether you think of them as representing archetypes, or whether you think of them as like the physical clothing, as it were, of beings that represent the qualities that they stand for. However you conceptualize that in your own mind, it really does seem, at least from my vantage point, that these centaurs, they're kind of quite playful. Now I'm anthropomorphizing, that's the anthropological term for it. That's what I'm doing now. I'm making them into beings, or referring to them as beings, not making them into beings. But they seem to be very playful because they pop up at all sorts of unexpected moments if one is learning about them or discovering them by working with them in your chart or chart of others and so forth. And so you can expect lots of little aha moments that will draw a very interesting picture overall for you. I'm sure you've found that too, Heather.
Absolutely, absolutely. And truthfully, I see them as conscious beings. I
Yeah,
really believe as we're moving into the Aquarian age and coming back into that remembrance that everything is sacred and
exactly.
everything is conscious.
Yeah,
And we can actually be in relationship with these planetary beings, with the healing centaurs, with the sun, with the moon, with the galactic center, and know that we are held and guided and supported by their consciousness to move into
yeah,
our own higher consciousness. And I think that is the beautiful gift of moving into the age of Aquarius. As we let ourselves heal, we can come into this deeper consciousness and connection with them and all of the life around us.
I think, however one conceptualizes it or contextualizes it, what Heather was describing and what I was hinting at as well, you can see it at work now, this kind of a process. And it may not be fully understandable in any kind of a rational sense. That never mattered to me particularly. But to me, it brings the sense of the great mystery really close in, is one of the things I experience around these creatures, you know.
Said. Well, thank you for being in this conversation, Melanie.
Thank you for inviting me into it. Thank you.
And thank you, all of you in this community who are working this time so consciously and being guided by these planetary energies and healing centaurs. Blessings and love to all of you.
I echo that too. And thank you for being out there in such a way that it makes it possible to speak about these things.
Mm.
Thank you.
Beautiful.